here. They always put the very best at the end. We decided to dress alike. That's what you do to prepare for experiential. So my name's Bob Lynch, founder and CEO of Sponsor United. In an ironic twist, we're partners with Brand Innovators. You guys use our platform and technology, so I feel like I'm on stage doing an experiential event right now because I'm trying to convert you guys all, I guess, to customers eventually. So I guess by the end of this, we'll see how good of or bad of a job that I do with that. But I'm here with Dan Fleetwood, VP of Global Sponsorships for SAP. SAP, the juggernaut of, I would say, experiential for the length of time and the diversity of partnerships that you have. Everything from the Kentucky Derby, you were just in Germany in Munich, to Fashion Week in LA, I believe, last year, to team sports, naming rights. So we're gonna dive into all that. But why don't you give us a little bit of background on you and SAP?
Yeah, sure. So Dan Fleetwood, I've been with SAP for about 17 years. I've been working in and around the sponsorship world for about the last 13 years of that, of those 17. And it's been a great journey. When we first started, it really was all about experiential. It was about white glove parties at the Masters and the U.S. Open, and really trying to bring C-suite into these types of events and wine and dine them again by software. And then about 12 years ago, our CEO at the time, Bill McDermott, saw that these are more than just white glove events. You can partner with these teams and leagues and entertainers and actually tell stories. We can meet people at their passion point. And I'd like to say Bill was a bit of a visionary on that, because before that, you didn't see a whole lot of technology sponsors in sports and entertainment. You saw IBM, but it was kind of more of the branding elements, the logo slaps and that type of thing. And then, when we came in and started with the Yankees and the NFL and the NBA, we started to take our technology platforms and integrate them into these leagues and start to tell authentic stories to people. And it was a much more interesting story to talk about what we did with the NFL or the NBA and how they used Hana database to power their stats platform. And all due respect to the bottling company down the street, we love them and we hope to continue to work with them for many, many years. But when you're telling stories, when you're trying to engage people, meet them at their passion points, talking about their favorite team or football or soccer or whatever it is, it's a much more engaging story. And so for us, it's been a pretty incredible journey these past 12 years. How we've built our portfolio and learned a lot of lessons, and also shaved a few off along the way, and understood what works and what doesn't. So it's been great.
So I was just telling Dan, it's been like 10 or 15 years since I was at Adweek when I was with Z100 selling the Jingle Ball concert. It was the one time a year that every CEO who had a 16-year-old daughter would actually return my calls, and we could get them in a room together. Flash forward to today, and we just put something out that experiential activation since pre-COVID, 2019 to present day today, has increased 48%. So the number of brands, we tracked about 25,000 activations this year. So, when you're the early adopter, you're the one that starts to really kind of lean into this, then you have a room full of people that are learning all these great best practices and starting to enter the space. And so how do you think about sort of the increased competition? Where live events today are not what they were 5-10 years ago, just in general in the experiences for consumers. And then you add in more and more brands that want to help to elevate the experience. So that's a more competitive environment, but it also creates more innovation as well. How do you sort of think about it in today's day and age, even versus 5 or 10 years ago?
For us, it's it's having to be more targeted, more prioritize a little bit more around your objectives. I mean, what's the old adage? When you have a hammer, the whole world looks like a nail, or something like that, right? And as you're looking at these great platforms that you have with these partnerships, there's a billion things you can do, and they're always trying to sell you more things. things, and there's always opportunity for you to dive in. But what I think we've learned and how we've evolved over the last 5 or 6 years is, what's going to be the most compelling to the people that we're trying to talk to, right? And with the caveat that these platforms are amazing, brand platforms. They're great to create awareness for your brand, to put your logo up, and to start to kind of create that association with these incredible leagues and teams and entertainers. But for us, it really comes down to what's the story behind the logo, right? And so for us, we did activations and experiences on the plaza. We did try to do some fan-friendly stuff and things like that, and it was great. But when we actually looked at the metrics and the return on some of those things, it doesn't really, you don't get the payoff on that for us, right? Obviously we're looking to speak to business decision makers, folks in the C-suite and folks that are influencing that C-suite. And so for us, it's about how do we get the right people and how do we get the technology that we're bringing to bear on their team or wherever it is. Like we'll take the 49ers, for example, right? It's an amazing day when you can bring them out to Levi's Stadium. You can bring them down to the field. They can have an amazing experience there on the field and high-fiving with Jerry Rice or whoever it is that's running around, and bring them back up to the suite. They can watch the game, and then at halftime, we can bring them upstairs to a place called the Executive Huddle, and it's basically their game day war room that runs on the SAP Analytics Cloud, SAC. And so we take them in there, we tell them the story about how everything from food and beverage to parking to their happy or not kiosks, and collecting all that data into one place and how that's impacting how they run the game from week to week and from minute to minute, for that matter, and so how and all the value that it's driven for them. And so when we can take a customer through that, it's the whole thing's an experience. From the minute they get to the parking lot and walk into the stadium to when they leave, they're being inundated with the SAP brand. And whether it's the logo they're seeing, that's up on the screen, or when they're walking into that executive huddle and seeing our technology, bringing value to their game day experience, it's an amazing thing. And so I think for us, the evolution has been, yes, there are a million things to choose from, but you kind of have to target, or you have to be specific about the objectives and target those people in a way that's going to be really meaningful to them.
Yeah, I love that. The almost arms race of experiences that you have to create in some ways today. How do you have a team of across the globe, 35 people, split up on a lot of different initiatives. How do you think about, especially for the people in the room that might have limited resources, smaller teams, maybe they're newer to the space and don't have all the sort of years and experience of going through this? How do you think about sort of teamwork on the back end in terms of the coordination, in terms of like what works and what doesn't? Like what have you seen that works really well, and what should marketers today think about related to that?
I think for us, we have limited budget, limited agency partners, and agency resources. I mean, I think they play a key role for us in very specific areas. But for us, it's about it really is about planning and preparation. I mean, there's nothing that can kind of get around that. I mean, when we look at what the experience is going to be, it really is about speaking with our customers. It's talking to them. Our team, my team, is in the suite with the customers. They're not 7 layers removed. We don't have other people that are engaging with them on a nightly basis or on a program basis, right? And so we're on the ground, boots on the ground. They're living these programs with these folks, and they're getting real-time feedback from customers and from our executives. And so, I have the, thankfully, and the luxury of not having a whole lot of churn and turnover on my team. The core team that we've had has been there on an average of at least 5 years plus, and so it's. Some people say it's a blessing and a curse. I think it's a blessing in the fact that there's a ton of knowledge, there's a ton of experience that they have to draw on, and so as they're looking, and I talk about planning and preparation, as they're looking at what those next programs are going to be, there's a wealth of knowledge for them to draw on, or there's people that they can go to and ask those questions. So for me, it's really making sure that the people that you have on the team and are working on these things, that they're well taken care of, but that you're kind of relying on them and trusting them and their opinions as you put these programs together.
So you're talking about sort of like learning. One of the things that we saw coming out of COVID was everyone was more open to sort of being creative with how they think about launching activations on the sell side, the partners, because that's what happens when you have a trying time like that. And the diversity of these partnerships just changed dramatically during that time period. And historically, it was always about, well, this is our IP, we are the Grammys, we're the Cowboys, we're this, and you can play in our world. And I think that that weight has shifted, where brands are really truly more partners than they were in the past with that. Given the diversity of everything you guys do, I mean, horse racing is not necessarily like the Kentucky Derby. You don't necessarily think data, technology, sort of innovation. Fashion Week, totally different environment in terms of how does that work with technology in that space? And then obviously you look at teams and naming rights and things like that. How do you quickly learn? Because you're in Munich. So I think that's probably a little bit different culturally than maybe LA in some regard. How do you sort of learn about the environment, the audiences, the culture of those communities you're trying to enter into so that you can put together really authentic and meaningful sort of experiences, I guess?
Yeah, I think for us, I think it's the blessing, the value, whatever, of being a multinational organization, right? Where we've got over 100,000 employees worldwide, and we've got offices in 178 countries. Don't quote me on that number, but I think that's what it is.
78, put that down.
But I think that's again, you go back to we rely on ourselves internally a lot, right? And when I say internally, I mean to your point about the culture, right? We work very closely with the marketing teams in the field, and when we're developing, obviously we do our nights at Madison Square Garden and Levi Stadium, and we can do that in our sleep almost, right? But when you're going into places that are foreign and that we don't do things in all the time, we're going to Prague for an NHL international game. You're working closely with the people that are in that market. You're telling them, okay, here's the framework of what we want to build. This is how these things typically go. How do we build this with you so it's going to be meaningful to your customers and partners? And so, it really is a reliance internally on our vast network of employees and the field marketing teams, mainly in those different regions, to really figure out how to bring these things to life. I mean, what we do is we start at the beginning of the year when we're planning, and we say, we know there's going to be F1 races in all these different markets, right? We know there's going to be NHL international games in these different markets. There's going to be, tennis tournaments, and so people opt in for them. And as the field opts in for them, that's when we can kind of start that whole process of going through and planning and customizing it to that local market. So it's going to be, like I said, the most impactful for them.
What do you think people get wrong when they go into a new partnership or a new environment where maybe they're not as experienced? Are there things that pitfalls that people should watch out for related to that?
Yeah, I think what I've learned is your first year you're going to get it wrong.
Give us some beautiful mistakes is what I'm asking for.
I mean, we lost the CEO of the parking lot of the Kentucky Derby, so that wasn't that great. But I would just there's things that that happen, right? I think that's what you always have to go and have the mindset and set the expectation with your stakeholders. Year one is a learning process. It's always going to be a learning process. You know, yes, you can hire agencies, and you can hire experts, and you can do all those things, and we've done that. And again, no disrespect to the agencies because they're critical to us. But they also, everybody's starting to try to figure out how this, you know, how you can build a program for SAP and to our expectations. And so until you're there and you experience it firsthand, and you experience SAP programs firsthand, right, you have to know how both of these things work together. And so the first year is always going to be a learning experience. So you kind of have to walk before you run. And so I think, you know, I mean, another time we lost Jerry. Well, what happened? I didn't lose Jerry Rice. We went into the wrong side of the stadium, and I had to walk. I was Jerry Rice's bodyguard, which was never a good idea. When the 49ers were playing the Ravens in Super Bowl 47, I think, and we had to get from one side of the stadium to the other, and I thought I was going to die at some point because there were people screaming at us. So it's those types of things, right? Like I didn't know, you know, you should have somebody tell you how to get talent up to a suite because it's not the same way in every stadium, right? And so they just happen to have one side of suites and the other side how to get around. So it's those kinds of things, right, where you don't think to ask the question ahead of time because you just don't know. And that's a dumb example, but it's an example of those types of things. And then there's, you know, just other things around content, right? And speakers that work, right? There's, you know, I think we had a John Mayer concert, one of our Super Bowl programs, because I was making on something else. But like, you know,
good make good by the way.
It was a good make good, but like it was one of those things where you know, half the people were like, oh, I'm not John Mayer, right? Like we lost a bunch of people, and it was John Mayer singing to like 3 people, and you were like, this is probably not a good idea. So it was those types of things where you just kind of have to learn the content that works, the programs that work, what people's expectations are, what people are going to opt in for, what they're not, and so I think you know, those are the programs on the ground. I think then also when you talk about experiential, I talk about, hey, we did, you know, when we were a pillar or a cornerstone partner at MetLife, you know, we did the SAP Combine, and we realized that, you know, we were getting 20 kids through this thing, you know, prior to the game, and it was really not worth what we were paying to do it. So we're better off putting some analytics and some data on the big screen and letting that run before, and that's going to get you what you need because, you know, the other stuff wasn't working. So it's test and learn and being open to understanding that, you know, not everything's going to work out 100%. Not everything's going to, you know, be exactly what you're looking for.
Hello? Oh, like John Mayer, I'm gone. It's interesting related to that. In a world where we want instant feedback, you have to have such patience with sort of how these things play out, what you can learn from in these different environments, and set yourself up for a long-term success with that. I only had a chance to, I escorted the Geico caveman at Sun Life Stadium, at then Sun Life Stadium, walked him into where Kenny Mayne was DJing at Live Nightclub. A little different experience in that life in terms of game day experiences. I did not lose him in that. Talking about you know, all these opportunities, SAP is obviously a brand that everybody knows, and you have a lot of opportunities. How do you think about sort of, there's a breadth of partnerships that you could take on, or it's sort of like, hey, let's go deep, let's really figure this out. This is an important market for us to be in. You certainly do that with like your naming rights that you've renewed in San Jose, but as you know, at the same time, you're probably doing things that aren't as integrated and as in depth. Everybody has constraints. Every brand has constraints. No matter how big they get, there's always, you know, something you can't do. For the people in this room, like, how should they think about, from an experiential standpoint, like, where do we put our efforts, and how much should we spread ourselves thin versus sort of like, let's figure out this one place and then figure out a way to repeat it and scale?
I think you just said the way to approach it, right?
I don't
Which
know.
is, yeah, I think you have to, again, I go back to the, it's the test and learn approach. I think what we've learned is start small, start focused, figure out what works, and if it's a good thing, then great. You build on that and you try to replicate it. I think for us, we do have a pretty extensive portfolio, and again, I'm lucky enough to have a team that is strong enough to manage those properties and be focused on them day in and day out. And so they're working, hand in glove with the partner managers on the rights holder side, and just the relationships that they build there. I think, and again, I'll brag a little on my team because I've heard this feedback, so I'm not just making this up. But they, most of our partners will come in and will tell us, hey, you guys are one of the best partners that we have to work with, and that's because you don't hide behind other people. You don't hide behind, we establish that relationship one-to-one with the rights holders, and we make sure that they know who we are. They make sure that they understand what we value, and what the objectives are that we're trying to reach with this partnership. And I think that is probably one of the biggest things that's led to the success that we've had with a lot of these partners, because they know we're invested. They know that, and on both sides of the equation, if there's an issue, if there's a challenge and a problem, you spent the time building the relationship enough where you can go and have that conversation with somebody, and you can talk to them about it, and it's going to get solved. There's been very, very, very few times, I can recall 2 or 3 times, where it's blown up into an escalation that couldn't get resolved by the account teams.
So I want to zoom in on that because everyone loves the fun side of the experiential, the creative side, doing cool things, the stuff you see on Instagram. But there is this other side of the art and science of experiential in terms of the data. You're a data-driven company. At the end of the day, these investments have to be justified. How do you create alignment and accountability on that side with your partners? To your point of some things don't go right. What's sort of that honesty conversation and that accountability, and how do you think about data today versus the past in terms of being able to drive smarter decisions around experiential?
Yeah, I think for us it's for the experiential side of it, whether it's again just your straight up suite hosting and customer hosting versus dinners or speakers or whatever it is, right? It's what we're trying to make sure that we always do is that there's a straight line between the person that's being engaged, right, and the pipeline that's attached to that, right? And we're trying to get smarter and smarter about that, right? And understanding, from a high level, hey, how much was this person, what was the pipeline value of this customer when they walked in? Was there an increase in that pipeline number between, the time that they spent with us and the next 45 days, right? Hey, is there, a higher propensity for a deal to close in the next 60 days between the time they visit with us? And so it's, continuing to try to refine that understanding and get smarter about that. It's also at the top of the funnel too, when we look at it from, just engaging people, whether it's through, through social media or any of those other things, those other ancillary pieces of it, right? Like, hey, if we can see how people are coming in, if we can see somebody's interested in a particular, partnership, or if we can see that they're interested in a solution that's attached to a partnership, right? How do we put more of that into their hands? How do we, take the NHL on-bench coaching app, right? We know that this guy's a hockey enthusiast, right? So let's show him what we built with the NHL and kind of try to keep him moving through that funnel and onto on a conversion path for us. And so I think it's really for us, it's about, making sure that we have, from the top of the funnel to the bottom and into that conversion path, right, that we're tracking every single step along the way. And when we see things that create more engagement, we heavy up on that. And I think this is what I want. Probably every single speaker that's talked to you today has said that, right? You can kind of look at this and see very clearly what's working and what's not when you're looking at engagement numbers.
So let's talk a little bit about that top of the funnel. What happens in experiential should never stay in experiential, I suppose. And there's a lot of interesting things you guys do with like Lewis Hamilton and A Day in the Life of, which is amazing content if you haven't seen it. That's a little different than today. Nobody saw me walking around with the Geico caveman. Probably would have made some interesting content. I'm sure losing Jerry Rice would have been very clickable, TikTok-worthy content.
I don't think we can share any of his stories. Him and Joe Montana together, by the way, that's gold. If you can ever do it, do it. But you can never show it. They tell some pretty salty stories. It's pretty great.
I only have one experience. I'm not trying to be topper, by the way, because that's like, Joe Montana. I'm a Notre Dame. You got me right there. But Dan Marino and the Marx brothers in the Bahamas as part of our partnership, sitting at a bar.
Yeah,
I can never speak of it other than that. That's all I can say. 1980s, Miami Vice, interesting times. But talk a little bit about how you think about sort of bringing that to life outside of the event. You do all this work to coordinate these amazing experiences. How are you thinking about telling your story outside of the physical venue now versus the past, given all the content pieces that you have? And teams want that as well.
Yeah. No, I mean, and this is something that we, I don't want to say we struggle with it. I mean, there's content, like you talk about the Lewis Hamilton video, for those of you, the quick snippet is basically,
lives an off life.
It's funny, I'm just thinking back to a story. Hasso Plattner, who's the majority on the Sharks, but also one of the founders of SAP, was up on stage at our big user conference one time, and we like to brag that like 78% of the world's transactions go through an SAP system. It's like a big talking point for us. And Hasso Plattner was on stage one time, and he was like, yeah, I don't know if I believe this, but basically it means we do a lot. And so we do a lot, according to Hasso. No idea where
I don't know, but that sounded great.
But anyway, I'll think of it in a second. No, but I think from so what we've tried to do is to take that whole story of hey, it's the digital world and how we apply that to the digital transformations that companies are going through. And I talked about what we did with the 49ers, and so it's kind of, if you're not at Levi's Stadium, you're never going to see. This is Lewis Hamilton. Sorry, I'm going to go back and finish the story. Now I'll go.
The man has done a lot of events in a lot of towns.
Basically, is we everybody's our customer, and so it goes from him getting up in the morning and taking a shower with Head and Shoulders to putting his tag hour watch on, his Adidas shoes and everything else, and it's all the different things that how SAP impacts his life, and so it's a great piece of content because it kind of showed the integration of it's Lewis Hamilton, and Lewis Hamilton doesn't use SAP, but everything he touches does. And so it's kind of a cool little story, and so that's one way we talk about expand and give people an understanding of what we do. Where I was going with the Niners thing was that I talked about it before, that we have the executive huddle, but unless you're there physically, right, you don't really see how this works. But one of the things that we're trying, and the whole test and learn idea, is that we've with the Niners developed like a whole Apple Vision Pro instance of that dashboard that we can take out and show people, and and we're trying to figure out how the 49ers are going to use it, because it's one of those things where they're like, yeah, this sounds really cool, but we're not really sure what this is going to bring from a business value perspective. But it's one of those. As soon as they did it, they actually started to take it with them outside of the executive huddle room and bringing it down to executives and showing them during game times. And I think it's one of those things that's just going to kind of, they'll continue to ideate on it. The Apple guys are trying to get us to give them an instance of it as well. So it's one of those where you're continuing to try to figure out ways to show the power of the technology, and you're not always sure where it's going to lead, but you just kind of have to use these new platforms. Obviously, I cannot go through a presentation without saying AI, so there I said it. But that's also a big thing for us, right? Yeah. Business AI. In all seriousness, business AI is a huge topic for us. We want to establish ourselves as a leader in business AI. So it's how do we demonstrate that through things like the Apple Vision Pro, through things like what we're doing with the NHL and the on-bench coaching app, and what we'll be releasing soon, which I can't talk about, but it'll be great. But how do we infuse business AI into all these different platforms as well? So that's another thing that's going to be huge for us.
It's amazing. You're talking about sort of Jerry Rice in parking lots in the past, AI, Apple Vision Pro in the future. I feel like we could spend another 30 minutes, an hour talking about sort of the future of the business, but it's been an absolute pleasure to hear a little bit about SAP's journey within Experiential. Tremendous amount of learnings coming out of this, and fortunately we have Jeff Fortman with his massive social following to make sure that this lives way outside of this live event here. So,
thank you guys. I think just we have 1 minute, and one comment or question for you, Dan, is, and I remember 15 years ago or so, FedEx having sponsorship at a stadium. It was like, wait a minute, we don't just have game day, we also have 6 other days of the week. So why don't we do chalk talks with our VIP customers and coaches on non-game days? Is there examples of that where you're like, we find and leverage the properties or the sponsorships that we have beyond maybe the core program throughout the sponsorship?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think as I said, for us, it's about the technology. So all of our partners, or 95% of them, I'll say, are our customers, right? And so for us, the bigger value, or just as big a value, is the customer stories that they can tell. They can talk about how they're utilizing the technology and what we're bringing to bear. And so whether it's at Sapphire every year and having the Cirque guys come up on stage during during keynote speeches, or having an NHL coach come and visit with a group of folks in Toronto in their war room, and talk about how the on-bench coaching app is helping them get better. It's just all those different ways where we can kind of, again, it kind of lends ourselves to our strategy, is that we're putting our technology in their hands. These folks are then becoming advocates for us, and I think it's one of the greatest parts about these partnerships is when we can get folks like that to speak about the value of SAP.
Awesome. Love it. Thank you guys. Thank you so much, Bob, Dan. Thank you. A round of applause for them. Dan, come on.